to the show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Off the Mats Podcast. This episode, I'm going to welcome back friend of the podcast and MMA badass, Miss Jamie Colleen. And for this episode, we're actually going to kind of talk about a little bit more of a serious topic, which is with October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We're actually going to kind of dive into that a little bit with Jamie being an advocate and a supporter of, survivors out there of domestic violence. I really want to sit and talk with her and just kind of pick her brain a little bit about the matter. So, Miss Jamie, thank you for coming back and doing this with me. Welcome.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me again.
It's always weird whenever trying to schedule things with people. And I know with you, you have such a busy schedule. So I'm always worried because I'm like, let's try to find a time. But it's like, because whatever time works for you, it's like, I will make my time work.
It can definitely be hard sometimes nailing me down. That's why I always appreciate you, because you follow up with me all the time. Because if it wasn't for that, then it's hard for me, especially with setting reminders. I need reminders to set reminders, and it's a whole thing. So yes, I appreciate you always staying on me. So
yeah, I get it. I've actually missed 2 episodes of recording because I double booked myself, and then I put a date on the wrong month, month and year. So I'm just like, oh my God, people are like, dude, you're doing so well with this. How do you keep it all together? I don't.
Yeah, we don't. I get that question all the time. They're like, how do you balance it all? I'm like, I don't. I really don't. I don't.
So when it comes to domestic violence, I guess sometimes it's a weird topic. I don't want to say a weird topic, but it gets a little, odd when it comes to the public perception of it, because we know it is a thing, but it almost feels like for so long and for so many, it's like we know it's a thing, but it's kind of an overlooked thing. It's there one moment, and then the next moment, it's like, it's like the moment's passed. So when it comes to, I guess, the topic of domestic violence, how does it, for someone who's been, through it, how does an individual come forward about it?
Well, also, everybody's story is different. Every situation is different. We might share some similarities, but now no one story is the same. So with that being said, it can look, with somebody coming forward, it can look like a lot of things. It could be, a forced situation, which was a lot like mine, which is I didn't really have a choice, and I still didn't really sort of connect my situation with domestic violence. I think it just, because I kind of, it stems from my childhood too. I grew up in a domestic violence household. So it was just sort of my norm. It's when something's wrong, or, when something, my dad shouldn't hit my mom. I know that's wrong. But you're not really shown any other example of how, what a healthy family dynamic looks like. And so you sort of carry that with you until, maybe you're taught different, or you meet someone that maybe shows you a new way. But for the most part, you might see it where for me, I was forced into a situation that made me look at my life, and, because I came across people who were like, this is abuse. Do you realize this is the situation you're in? And I'm like, and then the more resources that were given to me obviously, like, I start connecting the dots and it all starts making sense. And I'm just like, like I said, like when something's wrong, you see, like, this is not, the right way. But like, once you, I guess, come to the realization is what I'm trying to say, that, this is what the reality of my situation is, that I was able to essentially put a label on it. But, some people, maybe, like I said, it's all different. Sometimes people might meet someone, and a lot of abusers are like very charismatic. They are not, they're very good at hiding who they really are. So they put on this persona or like a facade to, like, reel you in the beginning and just sort of like finesse you. And then you just, you know, fall in love with them, and then they kind of latch on to you. But there's, for some people, they realize it in the beginning and they're like, I'm not doing this. And then some people just kind of get sucked in. And then, before you know it, like, you're stuck in this situation. You don't know how to get out of it.
So I guess with your scenario, your situation, you know, was it like, did it start off like non-physical and then like kind of just like, was it like a verbal thing at first? Like, because I've had friends that even on the outside, we're looking at, we'll see kind of the way that they're spoken to, by their significant other.
Mhm.
And there are times, where well, especially when we were younger, we didn't think anything of it. As we got older,
Mhm.
we would kind of approach that person in private, and we weren't sure if we were overstepping, if we were overreacting,
Mhm.
because it was just, again, it was just verbal. It was not physical, but it was just like,
Mhm.
so was it, for you, did it kind of start that way and just build up, or, how did it
Yeah.
come
So
about?
when I met my ex, who was also in the fighting community, so that's how we met. And in the beginning, he was very, like I said, he was very charismatic. Like, people were drawn to him. He was funny. He was good looking. Um, like, possessed a lot of the qualities that I would look for in a partner. But then he also possessed a lot of qualities that would be, you know, um, that would look like red flags to most people. So for me, I am such a nurturing person, and I like to help people, and I'm the type of person that wants to, like, you know, pull the good out in everyone. Like, I believe that, there's good in people. Well, I now know how to, like, use that tool so that it doesn't work against me anymore. But it was like, the things that I know now as red flags, I um sort of looked at it as like, okay, this guy's probably been through a lot in his life. And the more, like, we got to know each other, I learned more about, like, his upbringing and his background. I'm like, oh my God, this poor guy. So, oh, it makes sense why he said these things. Or like, oh, it makes sense. I was justifying his behavior and overlooking the red flags. And also too, because I really wasn't educated on domestic violence. And a lot of times people live in denial. You don't want to believe that this is happening to you, or that this person that you love and who's this amazing person, but then has this really dark side to them. Like, you want to see the good, and you want that to always, like, you want to believe that that good person that they show you will eventually, like, come and stay, when really it's really like the opposite. So for me, like, so, like, the red flags included, he was really controlling right away. Like, the physical happened almost right away, um where we got into, like, an altercation in front of the gym. And the yeah, he got mad at me because, so let me backtrack a little bit. When I met him, I was just sort of getting into martial arts, and I was, like, really passionate about it. And I was in a great place in my life, my early 20s. I was having a lot of fun. I had a lot of friends. I loved my training partners. I was like, I had well, my full-time job was, I worked at a fitness center in Cincinnati, and I did like the graveyard shift, like the 4 a.m. shift to noon, because that was the only schedule I could make work with my training schedule. So I would work that shift, then I would lift, and then go to the gym and like do my MMA training. And so that was my life, and I loved it. And then on the weekends I worked at a restaurant. So and then I taught classes at the gym to like pay my dues and whatnot. So I was a busy girl, but I was like loving life. And so when we met, yeah, like we just like connected, like but yeah, he got mad at me because one day we were at the gym and we had a new member come in, and I was like showing this new member around and like introducing them to the people that were there. And he got mad at me because I didn't introduce him as my boyfriend. I just said, "Oh, this is so and so," and it made him really angry. And he's like, "Can I talk to you outside?" I'm like, "Oh, sure," like not thinking anything of it. And yeah, he was upset. And then like push came to shove. He was like in my face, and I like pushed him out of my face. I was like, "What are you doing?" And then it was like a slap across the face. And that was like our first physical incident. And I was just in shock that that had happened and didn't really know like what to say or do. I was just like, "Oh my God." And I called my mom, and I'm crying. And, and then he's like, apologizing profusely and saying all the right things. And this is where that cycle begins, right? So like you have like this, some sort of abuse happening, and then, then they apologize and promise it'll never happen again. And then you go through like the honeymoon phase again, and then it happens again. So that was like, yeah, the beginning of like that cycle for us. And so I forgave him, and it happened again, and it kept happening. And so, but over time, I found myself becoming more isolated, to the point where like I quit one of my job. I quit my job at the fitness center because he always had a problem with me going to work. He always had a problem with me like being around like good looking people. Like I was the first person. I worked at the front desk, and so I was the first person that everybody saw, right? So like he was extremely jealous. He was really controlling. He didn't like what I wore. He didn't like the fact that I wore like workout gear, and just always accused me of seeking attention for the things that I wore. As you can see, I've always just worn stuff like this, but regardless, like it's nobody's place to tell, um, have such a problem with what I wear that I'm changing who I am to fit, whatever it is they want me to be. So, but at this point, I just, yeah, I was like in love with him. So and I didn't want to lose him because I was just like, "Oh, this is it." Like, "Oh, like I want to be like," I was determined to make it work. And, was willing to like overlook things because like we had all these plans together. And oh, like he painted this like beautiful picture of a life that we could have together. And so that was always my focus, so that when bad things did happen, I'm like, my mind would revert like right back to that. And like, okay, like, it's sort of like, you know, with, I don't know how to describe it really, but like it's like I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but you want to like see yourself through. You want to like get to that point of like,
Yeah.
but anyway, so and again, I'm just like, okay, well, that was my normal. Like, okay, I guess this is what people do. They fight and they make up. They fight and they make up, or you're supposed to make up. And but yeah, I always just lived these situations just justifying his behavior. And then just got to a point where I was like so isolated. Like I quit my jobs, and he always had a problem with me going to training. So he didn't want me training. He was just always on top of me, always had to know where I was, always checking in, always had to know who I was with, to the point where I'm like, I don't want to be around anybody, because I'm like, you get so sick of explaining yourself. So then you start like making decisions based on how, like, in fear of how they're going to react over every single little thing, not just of who I might be around. But it just got to a point where it's like, yeah, you'd rather just be alone and isolated so you don't have to fight or explain yourself. So, but it happened gradually, and like my family noticed. Um, I think I didn't until it was too late, and then I was pregnant, and then so, but it got like our living situation got bad. He didn't like me working, so that's like another form of abuse, which is like financial abuse, where yeah, like where you're not allowed to work and you can't have an income, so you don't really have you're solely dependent on your partner. So that was kind of me at that point, and I was dependent on him. And he was starting to become a bigger name in MMA, and but he wasn't at that point where he could just train full time. But he was refusing to work between fights because I know now that he just wanted to be on top of me, like over top of me all the time and controlling every single thing that I did. And so I was just, on eggshells at all times. And so, yeah, it just from there, because he was refusing to work, like we fell behind on like rent and bills. And then eventually we got evicted from a house in Cincinnati and had to move close to his family in Tennessee because his family has a farm and they had a house that we could stay in on the property. So there I'm pregnant and even more isolated, and I'm in East Tennessee where I don't know anyone except for his family. And yeah, people weren't exactly inviting like to me because I did experience like a lot of racism and stuff too. So I basically just like stayed in the house all the time, or like wandered around the farm a little bit. And I mean, and I'll tell you, like some days were nice because like there's animals there's horses, and I really enjoyed being pregnant. So but there a lot of like the physical abuse happened when I was pregnant as well. And then he ended up getting a job offer. Well, not a job offer, he met a guy and they like wanted to partner up together and open up MMA schools inside of the fitness center here in Philadelphia. So that's what brought us to Philly. So then I was like even further away from my family at this point. I'm just like, what is happening? But I'm still like hell bent, like, we're going to make this work. Like, let me just, if I just keep being perfect, then maybe he'll change. And it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't, it didn't matter because he still always found something wrong with what I did, no matter how perfect I was or tried to be. He was always like trying to dig into my past to find something to hold over my head. Or there would be times where we would have like nice discussions about things, and he would ask me questions about my childhood or different things, like maybe in high school. And I'm thinking like, oh, like he wants to like know who I was, like as a, like you want to share that, you want to share like who you are and what made you into the person you are today with your partner, significant other. But he was strategic. Like he did it so that he could have something to like hold in his back pocket so that he could pull that out anytime he got mad at me, or like it was just always something. So once we moved to Philly, things were like a little rocky to start, but then started getting really good. And then we'd have like a really bad like phase of like the physical abuse again, like, and like I was like the mental and emotional torture I experienced, it was a daily basis with him. And just like constantly beating me down, like I'm never good enough. What kind of mom will I be? Like, what can I teach our daughter because I don't have a formal education? Things like that, just always kind of like making me feel like, oh, you're a great person. You'll probably be a great mom, but like there's always that. Yeah, there was a time we had like a really bad incident when I was pregnant. I think I was like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 months pregnant, and it involved like me like in the bedroom trying to hold the door closed from him, and he like basically punched a hole like in the door, and the door like hit my belly, like hit my head. My head was bleeding. I had marks on my belly, and I wanted to go to the hospital, but he convinced me not to go because he was afraid of what the hospital might say or do. like calling the police. Um, and so he kept asking me what was I going to say? Like, um, he was like really like a nervous wreck. And finally I was just like, like, I think I'm okay. And I think, thankfully nothing was wrong with my daughter. So at that point, I just knew, because it always gets worse, right? And you would think at a point like that you're like, he has no regard for a woman carrying his child. Um, so does he even really care about, the baby? Like, so it started to sort of set in with me that like I don't want to be really in this relationship, but I didn't know how to get out of it, and I didn't know like where to start. And I knew with someone like that, you can't just like, I'm leaving you. Like, you can't, because you'll get hurt, and they'll threaten you. And yeah, so I just kind of like lived in my own little pretend world, and that was kind of like my safe place for a really long time. And when my daughter was born, that was like I just poured everything into her, all of my time and energy, and a lot of things that I did do to like kind of keep myself distant from him. And mind you, too, like he was working, like he would leave to go work at this like MMA thing, and so I was thankful for that. And then, but the times where like he wasn't, I would try to like, you know, do like, so there was like this free like events calendar in Philly at the time that I would, find things to do like for new moms or whatever. And I would, you know, find things to do to stay away from him. Um, so as, the years went on, like things would get worse, and he started abusing prescription medication and mixing that with steroid use and stuff like that. So it was like, as you could imagine, his behavior became even more erratic and just like really, really weird. But it was like an eerie feeling I felt all the time around him. Like at any second, like he's gonna flip out, and you don't know how they're gonna react. And it could just be something simple, like you could say the wrong thing. Like one time when Ronda Rousey started getting big and she was on the cover of the ESPN for the body issue,
Mhm.
I like made a comment. I was like, because he was like bashing her and like, how dare she? And, um, like, what kind of an example or role model is she? She's disgusting, like all these things. And I'm like, I think it's wonderful. I think she's great. So it was like, that was a bad move. I couldn't disagree with him. I always had to be agreeable to things, or he'd get angry at me. And that sometimes these arguments would last days. And, because he couldn't just accept things for like what they were, or just like nothing could ever be what it seemed. Like he was always paranoid. He was always like, there was always like an agenda. So it was just, yeah. Um, and then finally, like things kind of came to a head one year where like I was like like afraid for my life, for the things that he was saying and threatening me with. And then ultimately he told me to call my sister to tell her to come from Cincinnati to Philadelphia to get myself and my daughter. And so I did. I called her and she came. She jumped on a flight and was there. And I basically hid in the bedroom until she got there. Yeah, it ended up being like a whole ordeal where he like took our daughter that night, and then from there, that's when I started to learn about resources and like what situation I was actually in and what I was up against, because he's, people who that are abusive and that are narcissists, they all are narcissists. Um, they if they lose even the slightest bit of control over you, um, it's like the world is ending, and they'll do anything they possibly can to regain that control. And so, yeah, it was really hard when that whole ordeal started, and I was threatened into signing a custody order that I didn't want to sign. So then I was like really locked in, and I lived in hell for the next year. Um, and then an incident happened, and this was like the following year. An incident happened where, and thankfully he was in New York at the time working like this odd job. He would do like construction jobs here or there because like the MMA stuff fell through. And just to kind of keep us afloat, yeah, he would take on just random jobs. And at the time, he was working for his friend that was in the union in New York. And so it was Mother's Day, and he just was like going in on me. Like Celine and I had the best day that day, and he just called me and was just like going in on me, like saying these most like horrible things. I'm like, okay, he's having like an episode, but something over me, like it was just like something really calm came over me, and I'm not sure what it was. And very similar to the year previous that I was describing before, of like where he was just like manic, and I felt really calm, but I was like, of course I was like afraid, but I felt like the only way I could make good decisions in that situation was if I was calm and not saying or doing things out of like fear or like like emotion. So I felt that feeling again, and I was just like, I wasn't giving him what he wanted from me. What he wanted me to do was to apologize for something I didn't do, or to be like, oh, okay, it's all right, we'll get through, like that whole like thing. And I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore. I didn't say that to him, but my reaction was, okay, I don't know what you want me to do right now. And that's what I kept saying. I don't know what you want me to do. And he made him more angry because I wasn't like sobbing and like begging for his forgiveness. Because that's like, big thing with like gaslighting too. They make you think you're the crazy one, or they'll stir something up and then like flip it and make it seem like it's your fault or that you're the cause of it. And then you find yourself apologizing, and then often feeling like you really did cause it. And like, then you feel crazy, and it's this insane world I lived in. And so, yeah, I just was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know what to do. So then I come home, I call my mom, and I finally was just like, I told her like what had been happening, and she just was beside herself, and that, couldn't believe that I didn't reach out to family. But I don't know how I could have. I hid because I was, first of all, like humiliated and embarrassed. And I just like, I didn't know what to say, but I knew I needed help. I just didn't know how to ask for it. And I wasn't aware of resources at that time. But now I was, because, the previous year, it involved me having to call the police and all that. And, they don't really get into domestic disputes. They just refer you to family court and give you the resources. And so I ended up leaving Philadelphia. My mom, because we were supposed to go to a wedding. That's what he was working that weekend so that we could afford to go to his friend's wedding in Cincinnati. So that was like a big relief for me, because I wanted to see my family. I hadn't seen them that whole year. And so my mom suggested that we like leave a little early for the trip, and once we go to the wedding and figure things out, after the fact. And so I thought that was a good idea. So she sent us money for a train ticket. I did not tell him we were leaving, because I knew he would find a way from New York and not let us leave, because that's happened before. So I didn't tell him anything until we were on the train leaving. I said, oh, by the way, like, any normal person, you could be like, hey, I'm going to see my family, and it would be perfectly normal and a normal thing to do, but not in my situation. And so from there, I was called everything in the book you could imagine, like even accused of kidnapping my daughter. But it got to the point where I had like by the way, he's broken like every car windshield, like of every car that we ever owned, just to like insert his dominance. Like he'd get angry at me, and if we were driving, he would punch the windshield. And so they always ended up cracked. He broke and smashed every single phone that I owned. So unless like he was leaving town, he would always get me one of those like prepaid phones so that he could keep track of us. And so I had one of those when I left for Cincinnati, and I'm like, the memory kept filling up so fast. And I'm like, something dawned on me, like, I have to document this somehow. And so the only way for me to document it was one of my smashed phones, it was still like usable to play games on. So that's what my daughter had. She was using it to play games, keep her busy. And so I had to take that from her so I could use the camera on that phone to take pictures and then delete so that more messages can come through. So it was 17 hours of nonstop messages. I mean, I have thousands. I still have the boxes in my basement because we used them all for evidence in court eventually. I mean, thousands and thousands, like tens of thousands of text messages from him. Yeah. And so, yeah. And I'm just like, I could not. Then I started like thinking I had to start being like smart about like, okay, so I know I don't want to be in this situation anymore. So how do I, like, what steps do I need to take? So then I started like, reading and doing like my own research. And, of course, for me, like, especially for my daughter, like when you make a decision like that, I want to do things properly. Like, okay, we'll go to court, like we'll have shared custody and like whatever we got to do to make this work. But I knew I did not want to be in that situation anymore. And I knew that I wanted to be close to my family. So that would mean I would have to go through the process of relocating in family court, which is a really hard, like, it's a tough process in Philly to have that granted. So, which I was not aware of. But anyway, so like very, very long story short, when I got to Ohio, he was sending me like headings of like court documents. He wouldn't show me anything else. So I'm like, is this a Google image? Is he trying to like fuck with me? Like, yeah. I didn't know what to think. And so I started making calls to family court and asking questions like, is there, do I have a court hearing? Like telling them all my information. They're like, oh, we don't have anything. There's no cases open. Like we don't have anything on the dockets. And I'm like, okay, so he's messing with me. He's trying to scare me. And eventually, like, I contacted an attorney, and my family, I don't come from a lot of money, but, my family they're small business owners, and they ended up having to take a loan out on their business to hire an attorney for all of this. So it ended up being like a few years of us, going through this whole custody issue. But through that, it was just a matter of him using anything he could to like rip my life apart, to make it as hard as he possibly could for me so that I would have no choice but to go back to him. And a lot of abusers will do that. Like, well, she has nothing. Like, what is she? She has to come back to me. And then I have control again. And, but I just refused. I'm like, and if I go back, he's going to kill me. Like, really, I can just go back, and it's not, I was like, there's got to be there's got to be a way to get out of this, like, alive. And so I ended up homeless because our lease renewal came up while we were in Ohio, and he signed the lease renewal without my name on it and got rid of all my things. I had nothing. All I had was the bag that I packed for like the few days when we went to Ohio, because I had every intention of going back home until he reacted the way that he did. And at that point, he's too afraid to go home. And then like some days he would say, oh, just stay there. I'll bring your stuff. And then like hours later, you're kidnapping our daughter. Like, you need to get back here. There's an emergency order. There's people looking for you, things like that. And so eventually we found out that there was a court hearing that he had filed an emergency return of our daughter, which anybody can file, but things just have to be proven in court. In order to get it written off by a judge, you have to make the judge believe that the child is like in immediate danger. And he said some nasty, nasty things that if anybody heard, that they would say, oh my God, like, get this, like, we need to save this child. And so
they can just like say that with no like evidence or no proof. It's
Mhm.
just, oh wow.
Yeah. And he's so crazy that it's like, who would lie about something like this? Some of the things that he said. But I learned that family court, a lot of things you can just say and people will just, okay, well, it sounds like why it just sounds so convincing that it's like people trust me in the beginning, all the family court judges, I mean, countless court hearings. And it took years before we finally got before a judge who took one look at our case and like canceled his entire docket for the day. So we were his first and last court hearing. It was 8 hours of testimony, interviews. My family came, his family was there. Like it was a really big deal. And here we are 8 years later, and I still keep in touch with my attorney, and she said that people still talk about our case and how insane things got, because he's a crazy one. Everything we went through, I was agreeable to. I'm like, okay. And he'd be like, no, I don't want that now. Like he always would like switch it up because he wanted me to like fight and beg. And I just wouldn't. And he would, use our daughter as a pawn. He would use her to hurt me, and things like that. But it just got to a point. So yeah, we were homeless. And I was isolated for so long, so I didn't know, like, I had nobody really that I could reach out to. I reached out to some people, um, because it got to a point my family was paying for hotels for us, so that's how we were, like, living for a little bit, and then finally someone who I used to that used to help me with Selena at the gym, agreed to let us stay with her and her dad, and so that gave us some shelter for, a safe place to stay for, I don't know, a few weeks probably, until he found out where we were and he started harassing her to the point where she was convinced that like it was me. Like he was so like master manipulator, 100%. And I just, it got bad. So she kicked me out. One morning I woke up to text messages from her and she's like, you need to leave. And while I was staying with her, that's how I learned about women against abuse. That's where I really like dove into resources and, making all my calls every day, just trying at everything to find a solution for my daughter and I, and one that was safe. Because I did not want to go to a city shelter. Did not want to go to a city shelter. And so every day I called women against abuse every single day for weeks. And so, yeah, I was like rejected every single day. I was like, all right, try again tomorrow. That was me. I was like knocking on doors left and right every day until, I mean, I know it's not a funny thing to joke about now, but I just like, sometimes when I talk about it, I'm like, man, I was like that crazy lady that like they're finally like, just give her what she wants. Like she needs, but I know that's not the case. It's just like, resources are limited, but that's how I felt. I felt like I was just like, I mean, literally every single day, multiple times a day, calling the same people, crying, begging, and all while trying to keep it together for my daughter and like trying to maintain like some normalcy for her. And just so that, I mean, kids are so like intuitive and they can feel like the stress. So I just, yeah, it was definitely a tough road. But yeah, he found out where we were. She kicks us out, threatens to call DHS, like all these things. I'm like, what is happening? And so at that point, she tells him like where she lives. He shows up there in a cab. And at that point, I had acquired more belongings because my mom was sending us care packages. And so I had like a lot of stuff. I mean, not a lot, but just like definitely more than what I came there with. And uh, I remember seeing him and he like pulls out his phone. He's taking videos of me like bringing all my stuff out, putting it on the sidewalk and like loading it into this cab. And I had no idea like where I was going. But I ended up, we're in the cab with him and driving back to like downtown Philly. And I'm like not speaking a word. And he says to me, "You better think quick, think, think fast on your feet because all this shit's going to be on the curb when we get back." I was like, oh my God. So I made a call to my mom and she's like, we can't afford another hotel, like begging her. So I guess like she had to make calls to get the money to pay for another night for us. And we're in the hotel. He's there. Like he would not like leave our side. And I'm like praying that the person working at the desk would just take a look, just make eye contact with me, please. Because I just wanted them to see that I was in danger, or that I needed help. And they just, it's not their fault, but I'm just like, oh. And then I'm like, please don't say the room number. Please don't say the room number. And they're like, "You're in room, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, shit. And then he insists on like taking, like he's to the outside person. If anybody was in line behind us, I'm like, "Oh, that's a nice guy. Like he's helping them. And oh, he's a good dad or a good husband or whatever." And I'm thinking like, I'm in fear for my life at this point. I mean, more than I ever had been. And in fear for my daughter. And so we get to the room and he's just like interrogating me, like just would not leave the room. This went on for hours and I'm begging him, please leave, because I was losing my time, the time I needed to like make my calls and calling hotlines and different things to get help. And he wouldn't leave the room. And so finally I got kind of stern with him. My daughter was crying. She's ready for bed. And then he goes, "Well, if you're a little bit nicer, I would offer to help." And then he like left the room. I was like, okay. Like it was actually a relief, even though I'm like, in the position I was in, I'm like, thank God. I was so happy he left. And then, so most of that night I spent, making my calls, and then woke up early. And a lot of my communication with him was via email. And that was something I always, any communication I had with him, obviously, unless we were in person, I was very strategic so that, it was either like email or text so that I could document it. And then I could have it to go back on. I wrote everything down every day. I kept a journal. I have like 3 or 4 journals that I wrote in every single day throughout this whole thing, which I hope to publish one day. And but it's kind of sad when I read it because my like the way that I wrote it, like my wording was sort of how I would write a police statement, because I wrote it that way because I wanted people, or like the police, like if something did happen to me, so that it was a statement, where they could use it that way. So it was like, that kind of makes me sad when I don't read it often, but when I do, I'm like, wow. So so it's like, if it's one thing, for people going through this, and it's not even, maybe you won't use it and maybe you don't know if it's ever going to be helpful to you, but it's therapeutic for one. But also it's good to have it because it's documented. And so I always wrote like, what day it was, the time of day, and then I would just write my day out and in the form of how I chose to. So anyway, I that next day, and you've watched my documentary before, and there was like a part in it where I had said like we experienced what homelessness was like. And had already, but like I know what that feels like when you see those people pushing their carts on the street just aimlessly, like you have nowhere, like you're homeless, like pushing a cart and like whatever possessions you have. And I know what that feels like because, after I stayed at the hotel until they forced me to leave, I had nowhere to go. And I'm like, oh, so I had emailed him and asked him, what um because at our apartment, well, my old apartment was in that neighborhood, and it was like a shared basement with the other tenants. And so I had emailed him and asked him if we could at least put our things in the basement until I could like figure out something for us. And at which point, like, here's your kid, doesn't have anywhere to go, but you're not offering, like, you have friends. He had plenty of places he could have gone for at least a couple of days until or however long till I figured it out. Like, yeah, okay, here's the apartment. um, as long as, he just didn't care. So stayed at the hotel till they made me leave. He wasn't answering my email. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go there and maybe a neighbor will let me in. So I'm walking, and at the time, Selena was 4. I remember just holding her hand because I had all of our shit piled on the stroller. I'm just like pushing it, holding her hand, trying to like make light of how beautiful of a day it was, or like, oh, just making conversation with her so she just wouldn't even maybe notice or question. So we're walking, and a cab driver stops me. He's like, and I'm thinking, like, why now is somebody trying to like, the cat calling and stuff. And I'm thinking that's what it was. And I just ignored him, kept walking. And he was like, then he asked if I was okay. And he kept calling me ma'am. So I was like, he goes, are you okay? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, he's like, you're being followed. And he like described my ex down to his tattoo and said that he had been following us, and he watched him follow. And he said he just ran off that way and pointed toward the apartment where we were headed. I'm just like, oh my God. So I get to the door. I'm knocking on the door, knocking, no answer. So then I like open the mail slot and I look at the mail slot, and he's just standing in the hallway, like staring at the door. Like, it was so freaky. I'm like, oh my God. And so got him to open the door. I was like, listen, like, and I had turned my phone on the video in case something happened. I was like, can you please let us see put our stuff down? So like, he was like, okay. And I made it very obvious I had the video on, and put our things in the basement, and it was fine. I took Selena to the playground. She played while I made more calls, and I'm calling like, universities where they have like, programs and attorneys you can talk to and different things. And I was like getting nowhere fast. And was feeling pretty defeated by that point, just exhausted. I had lost my normal like walking around is anywhere between like I'm around like 130, healthy. And I was like 90 something pounds at that time. I had lost so much weight. Like I didn't recognize myself. So anyway, yeah, I just was, so defeated. I was like, felt weak, defeated. I'm like, what do I do? And my mom was just, listen, you got to go to you need to find a shelter. You have to go to Red Cross, call a church. You got to do something. She's like, she's like, we can't afford any more hotels. And I'm just like, oh my God. And so I was on my way to Red Cross, but I had stopped at the apartment to get some of our belongings, and which was a mistake. I probably should have packed a small, little overnight bag and kept it with us in a stroller so we wouldn't have to go back there. But I wasn't really thinking he was going to do what he did. And especially since when we left the apartment, there wasn't like an issue when I left my stuff there. He was just being a weirdo. And so I get back there, and there ends up being like, he's in the basement with us, and he was just like really on edge. And I was tried to keep Selena close to me by making, a game out of like the packing, like, oh, find your favorite, stuffy, get your favorite jammies. And, oh, where's your, and we loved going to the library. So they always had like a free book section. So anytime we went, I would like grab a free book so that we had things to do. And and she loved to read. So yeah, I was like, oh, get your favorite book, all the things. And then it ended up, because I knew if she got close enough to him, he would grab her. And that's what happened. And I was begging him, please, that you can't, care for her right now. Please, please, please. And then it got physical, and he was, had his forearm behind. So he was on a few stairs up, and I was still in the basement ground, and he was holding our daughter, was like crouched over me, and he was like had his forearm on the back of my neck and was trying to like slam my head to the steps, and I'm like screaming like for him to stop, and then he just lets go, and he gives Celine had her arms out to me, so I took her, and then he screamed, Jamie, don't do that, you'll hurt her, like things like that. So obviously now I know that, so somebody could hear him. And then if the police were called, it was on me. And so I run up the steps, I run out of the basement and run outside. There was a police station close by. So like I had checked Selena to make sure she wasn't like injured, things like that. And so like I run to this police station, and as soon as I walk through the door, I'm like crying. I'm telling them what had just happened. And within minutes, a 911 call was received that I had pushed him down the steps and that he had injuries, backing up his story. But me, knowing him and what he's done in the past, like there were times where he would hit me or do something like, choke me or hit me with something, and I would threaten to call the police, and he would hit himself and say that he would tell them that I hit him first. So it was like, oh, self-defense. So I knew in my heart that is exactly what he did. He did something to himself to make it look like he was pushed or, whatever. And so, so the police arrested me and gave my daughter to him. And that was just, I've never been arrested in my life. I had asked him to do it in the back room, so it wasn't done in front of her. And I sat in a holding cell for a few hours. And a detective came down, and she had said to me, listen, she's like, we've spoken to him, and you have the right to speak to us, or you can waive your right to speak to us and go before the judge. And she's like, I highly recommend you speak to us. She said, we really want to hear like your side of the story. So I didn't really think anything of that at the time. So I get to her office, and literally like there's domestic violence awareness posters and like all these, like she was clearly an advocate and had knowledge. And I felt, even though I was sitting in like a chair, handcuffed to this chair, I felt a sense of like relief knowing that here's somebody that understands and wants to hear wants to hear what happened. And so I told her everything, and then they took me back down to the holding cell, and then let me go. Within like, I don't know, 40 minutes or so, they're like, oh yeah, you can leave. And so thankfully I wasn't like processed. There was no mug shots, thankfully. And but most importantly, like clearly they believed me and they let me go. And so straight from there, mind you, I had not slept. I was in a holding cell on like a tiny bench. One woman, had just shot somebody, so she was accused of homicide. There was another woman to my right who was like withdrawing from whatever drugs that she was on. And I'm just like, anyway, I was exhausted. I jumped on the bus, convinced the bus driver to make an exception for me. I had no money. I had no clothes. I had nothing. I just had a piece of paper that I took with me to go file for an emergency PFA at the main police station in Philly. And so he let me on. I go there, file it, but then like the next part of that would be to serve him, and he made himself invisible, like he disappeared, he and my daughter. So but then over time, then I learned that he counter filed against me. It was like a whole thing, and it was just, so that was sort of like the beginning of our family court issues. And then like the litigation abuse, what they call is how they'll drag the victim through the court system, and make it very, very difficult. So I was like painted to be, they say they don't look at poverty as a crime or like as a reason to, for the other parent to not have like custody of the child, but they do. They take it into account. And he had money. He had, money from his family, so they had the best attorneys, um, all the things. So we ended up going to like our first PFA hearing. And mind you, I'm still making calls to Women Against Abuse, trying to get into the safe haven still. And my dad, who I hadn't had a relationship with in years, um, my sister had called him, and he ended up coming up with my sister because my sister wanted to be, support me and come to the hearing. And that was the first time I had seen my dad in a really long time. And for him to come for that reason was like really awesome, and it meant a lot to me. So we went to court, and my PFA was granted. And right after the hearing, I got the call from Women Against Abuse that we had a room at the safe haven. So my dad and sister drove me to the location. And at this point, I still didn't have, I had like, um, uh, my daughter. It was still like, he still had her. So anyway, we drove to the location, and yeah, that was like my first time there. And it was rough, but then I'm like, all right, well, I'm here. So what am I going to do about it? Like, it's not my fault that I'm here, obviously, but like now I have everything I need to like fight this. I have shelter, I have food, all the things that we take for granted. I was like, so just, it was a gift. Yes, it was like, so having the feeling of just, I don't know, just feeling safe, and just having that burden lifted. And yeah, I'm like, all right, so now I can fight. And I fought every single day, even though I was painted a picture. He lied his way through court, like to the point where I'm like, um yeah, I was the bad one for many years. And people, they were believing him because he was so good at manipulating that. Who the things that he was saying, it's like, who would lie about that? Like, it was just too crazy and too sounded too real for someone to make up. And but yeah, people believed him. And so yeah, it just sort of, like I said, it was years before we ended up, I mean, a lot more stuff happened between that point and um, finally transitioning out of the safe haven. I still didn't have like full custody of my daughter at that point. But once I transitioned out, I mean, I was like training, even I was still at the safe haven. I forced myself to start training again. So then that's when I really started to like gain momentum, when I could see myself changing. And like through martial arts and what that gave me and the strength that it gave me. And honestly, people knew our situation, but they didn't know that I was in a safe haven, my daughter and I. And I didn't want people to know, because I didn't feel sorry for myself. So I didn't want other people feeling sorry for me, because then it's easier to fall into like a victim mode where it's like, oh, like, Amy, I'm so sorry. Like, no, I'm just gonna focus and train. And I had discussions with people about our situation, but not about my living situation. And so, yeah, I was just like training every day, like just, yeah, it was, when I think about it now and like what it took for me to go train, like it took me, because I didn't have a car. I couldn't work, because like any job that he stopped me for a really long time, to the point where like I would try to get a job, and then he would hear about it through like, I mean, Philly is even though it's so massive, it's still a small town, especially when you're involved in the same, for us, it was, the MMA community. And so, of course, I was like reaching out to people from gyms and different things, like, oh, like, I'm looking for work. And then it would get back to him, and then he would like somehow sabotage it for me. So it was just like, I still couldn't work, and it was crazy. So anyway, yeah, I just ended up, I knew that I remember having a conversation with my mom. Let's see, it was not that long after I started training again. I'm like, there's gotta be, I started thinking like, why isn't there a program, like some sort of like a self-defense program, or why isn't this part of the program that they use to, help people like rebuild? And I think self-defense is a very important aspect of, being in the situation we were in. And so, and not necessarily like learning how to physically defend yourself, because that's the last thing you want to do is fight back against somebody bigger and stronger than you who can only see red and wants to freaking murder you. So it's just more of like, which I'll discuss a little more about, like, the work I'm doing in that area. So it's just more about like being aware or recognizing a situation and understanding like, okay, is this going to escalate, and how can I remove myself from the situation so maybe I can lessen the the likelihood of getting hurt, or like how can I, there's ways to manage certain situations. So I sort of was like, why isn't there, like, my mind started working, right? So I'm like, man, this had my mom. I was like, I should start something like that here. My mom's like, listen, you need to, like, I love that you're thinking like this. She's like, but you really need to get yourself right before you can essentially pour into somebody else's cup. So I'm like, all right, well, that made sense. And so, so once I transitioned out of the shelter, like, I was actually living at my, so a situation happened when I was at the safe haven where they wanted to transfer me to another shelter, but that wasn't associated with women against abuse. And I was like, because it was, men were also there. And I just didn't feel comfortable. And I didn't feel comfortable, like, coming out of like this whole, like, I had rebuilt a lot and I felt really safe and like just very supported where I was. And I was like, I don't want to disrupt that. And so I felt scared and really uncomfortable. And I called my attorney. I'm like, I no. I was like, can you please help me, like, not let this happen? So then at that point was when I called Daniel, my coach, Daniel Gracie, and told him about, because I was afraid and I didn't know where I was. I didn't want to end up at it like anywhere other than where I was. And he was like, I can't believe you didn't tell me, like, all these things. He's like, no, this can't happen. You're not staying there. You're coming here today. He's like, you're not staying there anymore. And because at the time we had apartments attached to our gym where, if like people would want to come do their camps there, or he'd fly in coaches and different things like that. And so there was an empty room there. He's like, no, you're not staying there. And I ended up moving out. And so that was how I transitioned out. And then from there, I was able to, I got a job where I felt like very secure and safe. So I was like working all the time when I didn't have my daughter, working and training. And because he was so psycho and he tried to make it sound like the apartment wasn't safe where I was living. So I had to do my visits when I did have my daughter. I had a friend of mine who was on our team would leave his apartment and give us his apartment so that I would have like, no, like, it's safe. Like, this is where, because at the time too, I was like made to be the bad guy, and I was on defense mode all the time, always explaining myself. And for what? Like, I'm a good mom, my kid is safe. Like, I was not doing anything other than trying to rebuild my life after everything that had happened. And so anyway, so I was living there for a while. I was able to save up a ton of money and got my own apartment, and then got that King of the Cage title fight and won a title, and it was pretty awesome. And then from there, it took me like a couple years, but I knew I always wanted to give back. I didn't want going through what I went through and being able to come out of it the way that I did. I'm like, why isn't there, not that it's not supposed to be easy, it's never going to be easy getting out of something like that. And then on top of it, essentially like being successful and just like being able to like help other people. Like it takes a lot to do that. And I'm like, not that it should have been easier for me, but like in terms of like certain things, I think there's a lot of gray areas, I think, and a lot of gaps that could be filled by people who um, can help others like navigate through that. Because a lot of things I learned as I went. I had to learn as I went, and a lot of it. And so um, I ended up. It took me around 2 years to like really heal and feel like I was in a good place to give back. So um, I ended up coming back to approaching women against abuse a couple years later with this idea that I wanted to teach self-defense at the safe haven. And and they loved it. And so they gave me 1 day a week to come there. And sometimes my daughter would come, and I had a partner um, in that. And her job was to occupy the kids and have activities and things to keep the kids busy so that, those who were parents could just really dive into that self-care that they need, just like that me time, and then feeling just strong and empowered and having those moments without feeling distracted. Not that, I mean, come on, we love our kids, but we need that time, especially when you're in that shit, like, and then we don't ever have that time, like, come on. So yeah, she was helping with the kids, and then I was just there, like, and every day looked different. Every day that I was like there teaching, sometimes I'd have like, I don't know, 20 people in a class, and other times I'd have no people in a class, and sometimes I'd have just a handful. And I really wanted to approach it where, like, what do you guys want to do? Sometimes, like my bigger classes, we worked, like we trained, I was teaching, and then other times they'd want to sit and talk, and they'd want to hear more about like my journey. And so I didn't want to like approach it like I was, and I don't think I'm any better than anybody else who's gone through it. I'm just, decided to, use my experiences to give back. And so, yeah, that went on. And then, as my career gained momentum, and it was just like a conflict, my schedule, and then COVID, and then all the things. And um, it just, but it was really, I'm really grateful for that opportunity to be able to give back, because that was when I really realized how impactful my story was, and how much of a difference just by like sharing my experiences, because you feel really alone in those moments, the really dark moments, even though like, okay, you're in a shelter with people who are also abused, but it's just something about how you talk about it, and the way you share your story. So yes, really bad things happen to us, but you know, I think it's really all comes down to perspective. And I kind of look at myself now that, like, I'm maybe I had to go through that so that I can be who I am and help other people. Like, I don't know. So anyway, I just through that I started building a really strong relationship with Women Against Abuse, and just became a really sort of like a little force in the community. And I was very active in like community outreach, and anywhere they needed like a volunteer help, like I was always the first person like they would reach out to, and any like sort of events and things like that. And then it sort of evolved into me doing speaking engagements, and being part of the like the trainings that they do for new advocates and staff members and volunteers for the organization. So I I help facilitate, and I still do that on a quarterly basis, where I facilitate the classes for that and share my story as um, like an expert, like representative person. I don't even know my exact title to say, but anyway. So, and then through that, I started building relationships with traveling to like Harrisburg and speaking at the Capitol and being part of, speaking on, budget issues and how important it is to maintain our budget so that we can keep our programs running. And because I feel like one thing, it's a collective, right? So like one thing doesn't work without the other in my eyes. Like we have, like, everything in this program is essential to the next thing. So being part of that, and then through that, like just building relationships with like legislators and state reps, and just being part of what they're doing in the community. So it was really just like this really beautiful snowball effect, and I just really gained momentum. And and then through that I became like an official advocate for women against abuse. And then now, like last year, I got a call that I was nominated for the board of directors. They're like, well, your name kind of came up in a board meeting, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. It was very unexpected, but I was so flattered, and like, me, like, which is crazy, like, to think about it now, because I'm like, I'm just a person who just wants to help another person, and I don't know. So anyway, I was, I got voted in. So I'm actually the first former client of Women Against Abuse, who is a like survivor advocate, to be to serve on the board of directors. And I'm also serving on the programs committee as well. And and 50 years of operating. I don't know. I just find that very fascinating. And I'm like, I think it's kind of cool to say. But it has to be, like, aside from being a mom, I think one of my greatest accomplishments I don't know. Yeah, and I always like say, oh, full circle. Like, I mean, I've spoken at like massive press conferences. Like I've done a lot like in the community and working with some of our senators to advocate for new bills to get passed and things of that nature. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Oh, full circle. Oh, it's this. But then I'm like, it's just, I wrote about it. I'm like, man, I always think it's like full circle, like, oh, this is a full circle moment. Like, but I don't know. I think about it now. It's just, I feel like each thing is just kind of a milestone, and it's just like a continuation of like this journey that I'm on, and, wanting to like impact as many people as possible, and to just give people hope, and just surround people with like love and light, and to show them that, there is a way out. And it can be scary, but if you just, take the leap, right? With anything, you learn how to fly on your way down. And it's like either that, or you, like, for me, I think I just kind of saved my own life by like, all right, well, I'm about to lose. I did lose everything. I fucking lost everything, but I was willing to do that because I refused to go back to him, because I knew what the end result would be. And I thought, I can't let that happen, because then it's not worth it for my daughter to be without me. And that was like my driving force. So much of this was her. And then, she deserves that. She deserves to have a healthy mom, a healthy life, a happy life, and to do the things that she wants to do. And she has a story that she could write many books, what she experienced with her dad, and the shit we had to go through that was so unnecessary for her, because our court system is so flawed that, they always say it's in the best interest of the child, but they don't. It's not. And it was a grueling fight. It was a fucking fight. And I'm glad I kept fighting. And my mom was like, listen, she's like, just keep telling the truth and just keep doing the right thing. And eventually it's going to shift. And it did. And then it was, like I said, it took years before we got in front of that judge that was like, he's like, it should never have gotten that far. Should have never gotten that far. And that's sort of like, I don't know if that answers your question.
So as you were as you're going through and telling your story, I'm over here marking off everything because I had questions,
Uh-huh.
and I would just mark off, okay, answered, answered,
Oh,
answered. That's answered. That's answered. I
cool.
don't have to ask that. Cool. So, no, that Jamie, you're amazing. Like just hearing that story, the roller coasters, of that, just being a listener to that. I was over here, going through emotions of my own, listening to the story as I'm, you know, going from like, the first instance you hear it starting up and it's like, oh, that's concerning. And then you hear the next person's like, then it started getting angry. Like I'm over here
Mhm.
like clawing at like, the like quilts and stuff like,
Yeah.
and then, I started getting emotional, like, kind of teary eyed at some points. It was like, wow, this, like you took me, like you just took me to Cedar Point just now. And I just went on all the roller coasters.
Yeah.
As an advocate, in your role,
Mhm.
right now, just for everyone, um, that's it's amazing, and it sounds, you know, it's just crazy to see, where you came from,
Yeah.
how you got there, and then ending up, because you never gave up, because you kept
Yeah.
fighting, because you kept pushing through, and um, I don't know, it's fascinating to hear, and I'm glad that, on the other end of it, you and your daughter came out of it,
Yeah.
where you are. So,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing all of that,
Yes.
with myself and the listeners here. Um, I guess, one of the questions that I wanted to ask, also in terms of resources, and
Mhm.
because for you it was, just had to keep knocking, keep knocking. um for anyone listening, or that may know someone in a situation, or if a listener may, think they're in a situation, or they may
Mhm.
actually know for a fact that they're, um in a situation where they need to get out, um what are some resources, or what types of things, you know would you suggest, because I would imagine it's not an easy thing, as hearing your story, and you know having seen my mom in her situations,
Mhm.
in my own childhood, it, on the outside, it seems like there's a thought of like, just leave or just
Yeah.
do this, and
Some
it's
people say,
like,
"Oh, just leave." Like it's
it
not.
doesn't it's not that
It's
easy.
not that simple. It
um
really is not that simplistic. Yeah, not as easy as
like
it sounds.
like I guess, you know for any of us also listening as
Mhm.
well, like, how can we help? How can, someone help if they are aware?
Yeah, I mean, if they're aware, I would, obviously just be a listener, um, and not to question. Like I've heard a question a lot of like, well, what did she do to make him so angry? And that's not the case. And if somebody did say something to make somebody angry, it doesn't merit being abused. I mean, there's a difference between having an argument or, you know, something happening that somebody might regret, and it's not in the it doesn't fall in the real. I mean, yeah, like things happen sometimes, but it's not like a persistent thing, like a consistent thing that happens over and over, and you're not going through like these like cycles. But like once you start to recognize that there's a cycle and that this is kind of like how your life is, I mean, I think it's important to just, if somebody knows that they're in it, yeah, just listen to them, like, just offer them, like let them know you're there for them. I mean, there's resources everywhere. There's people waiting to help. Uh, I always suggest to people to call the hotline. There's a national domestic violence hotline, which is all of like the major hotlines are listed on my link tree and my Instagram page. But you can find them with like a simple Google search. A lot of organizations now offer like a texting feature so that if you don't want to call, you can text. A lot of sites also have a setting where that's like, it's like another safety feature where you can like exit out of it right away. And there's like no history that you like researched this particular site in case you're being like, watched. Yeah. So there's so many, like I said, resources. So I would just, be a listening ear and offer them resources. If it's somebody who knows they need to get out and they want to get out, there's what we call safety plans that can be implemented. So you can call, a hotline or get in touch with an advocate or call an organization. They have, they can like help you create a safety plan that can help you get to safety. People who, and also like sort of enforce people that you deem to be like a safe person in your life that can help you navigate through that. And all of which these things I didn't know existed. So as you could imagine, there are some, sometimes you're just forced into a situation where you have to like I said, you like learn to fly on your way down, you learn as you go. And but I think it really starts first with that, like you're not alone and there is help. There's help out there. So
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you again for sharing your story and really, I would say, providing kind of that light to let people know, if you are in a bad situation, there's a way out. So
yeah. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but just from like my personal experience and I mean, just from seeing like, others as well, as like, you don't ever want to like, a lot of the realization has to come from the person going through it. You have to be able to say, this is my situation and take action, because you'll always end up back where you were if you're not willing to say, like, it is like whatever the situation is, and then take action based on that realization, because otherwise it'll just, the cycle will continue itself. So that's another big thing too. And that was one of the hardest things that I did, was have to say, this is me, this is my life, and this is what it is. But it wasn't until I did that I was like, I could take the proper action I needed to get myself and my daughter out of it and to be able to rebuild. And some people think this sounds really crazy, but I had to forgive. I had to forgive my ex, because not for him, but for myself, because as long as the forgiveness for me was a release. I had to strip myself of him, even though I was away, I was out of the situation, but I was still harboring, I was still angry, I was still hurting, I was harboring all these emotional things that were attached to him. So therefore, in my eyes, he still had control over me and how I was like dictating my life by hanging on to these feelings and emotions. And so I had to forgive him to like release myself of all of that, so that I could like really start fresh and rebuild my life on my terms, and just like reclaim like me and who I want to be, and as a mom and as a person, and now somebody who can help others in the same situation. So I think it's really important you have to accept your situation in order to forgive, and then you can begin that process. And so, I mean, listen, I went through that too, where somebody does these things to you, and you want them to hurt more than they hurt you. You want to see them suffer. You want to blame them, which is, they're not wrong for that. Like, yeah, I'll be the first to admit, yeah, I wanted him to suffer and I wanted him to hurt, but it was only hurting me because that's what he wanted from me. He wanted me to like feel angry. He wanted me at his level. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to focus on me and do what I need to do so that this never fucking happens again. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a strong, important point there too.
Yeah.
Like you said, forgiven, but again, it's for you.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of it all,
daily
it's for
practice.
you and your daughter.
Yeah. And it's a daily, I could easily get angry again. Like, listen, I share my story more time. I've shared more times than I could even begin to count. In 8 years, I've been sharing a lot, and it's like each time I just heal a little more. Like I don't get angry. And my story has really shifted more from like what has happened to me. It's a small part, and I do go into detail because I want people to know like how messed up it was, but really it just has shifted more into like, it's like a story of becoming. Like I really had to like dig myself out of like years and years, all the way from my childhood, just like dig myself out of like this cycle. And I broke that cycle. Like it's been in my family for years and years and years. And I broke that cycle for my daughter and I, but I had to like dig myself out. I had to like, yeah, essentially like I felt so buried under like so much trauma. And I had to like, dig myself out and address the trauma so that I could, be who I am today.
Good. So before we wrap up here, as always, um, again, thank you for doing this. Did you have any shout outs or mentions that you'd like to put out there before we wrap up?
I would just say to address anybody that's going through a situation of their own, that to just, don't lose hope and don't settle for that, because and even somebody who is a survivor, and that we're not defined by what happens to us. We're defined on like how we pick ourselves back up and press on with life in a beautiful way. And you don't always, survivors are not required to help other people. You're not required to be an advocate or like share your story. But I think it's still such a beautiful thing to survive something so ugly and then to get out of it. And there's ways out of it. I don't, people who are in that situation, it's dark and sometimes you don't see a way out, but there is. You just have to sell yourself on it for a little while, and then you'll start to see the light a little bit, and then and always reach out. It's nothing to be ashamed of at all. And as much as society sort of puts this like taboo label on domestic violence or intimate partner violence, I mean it's not taboo. It's more common than you realize. And yeah, you're definitely not alone. Absolutely not alone. And as far as mentions, obviously, like, my organization, well, not mine, but the nonprofit I work for, Women Against Abuse, which is actually one of the nation's largest domestic violence service providers. And even if you're not in a Philly area, you can call any hotline and they can direct you to wherever, your area, and people who can help you that are close by. They each have like a laundry list of resources. And yeah, so I would just utilize them, every single one of them, because that's what they're there for. So yes.
All right. Awesome. I'll make sure to put this info in the notes as well, and any links.
It's womenagainst.abuse.org, I should say.
And for everyone else listening, thank you as always for sharing your time and listening to the podcast and supporting the podcast. Do appreciate you all. And You know, the show couldn't run without y'all. So thank you. If y'all have any questions, concerns, criticisms, feel free to reach out to me. You can always find me here on Off the Mets Podcast on Instagram or bjj.wiki on Instagram as well. I have an email. I think it's off the Mets 2020 at gmail.com. If y'all feel like sending me an email as well, I've been getting a couple emails out there. So obviously you guys are able to find it. So thank you for that. And I do check those emails. I don't check the horror movie podcast emails as frequently. So send all your emails there to Off the Mets. I want to give a big shout out again to our guest here, Miss Jamie Colleen. You can all find her on Instagram as well at Bad MMA, or is it MMA Mama?
It's just so it's Mama, but spelled MMA.
I always, every time I say it, I'm like, I know how I see it written, but then I try to say it, and I was like, don't say it, just spell it out.
It's so, it's actually super funny listening to some people sometimes. Like I've had like some of my so a friend of mine, he's got like a thick like Portuguese accent, and he's like, oh, it's the bad mama. I'm like, it's the bad mama.
So yes, you all can
however
find
you want to say it, but
at
it's BADMMA. Yes.
Bad Mama. You guys will see the link in the notes and on Instagram. But shout out to Miss Jamie. Thank you again as always.
Thank you so much for allowing me to share it. It's amazing. Thank you.
And again, if y'all have any needs or questions or concerns or feelings about the topic that we discussed, there will be links shared as well in the show notes and on Instagram. Otherwise, like I said, thank you, everyone. I love you all. Appreciate the hell out of everyone. You guys keep listening. We're going to keep making this show. Thank you, everyone. And bye.
Deep with it. Now let me sing a song.